live in a living color from Scimitar Studios in Denville, New Jersey. You're listening live to the Open Mic program right here on BlogTalk Radio as you all settle into the Sports Talk Nation. Brand new week here on March 7th, 2017. Glad you could join us here today as we continue our spring training tour here for the 2017 baseball season. Last week we opened up the spring training tour. We talked about the Cleveland Indians last Monday. We also talked about the St. Louis Cardinals on Friday, and today we talk about a rival in a lot of ways of both of those teams, especially of the Indians, and that is the Kansas City Royals. The Kansas City Royals, who this upcoming October, it will be 2 years separated from their World Series win against the Mets back in 2015. Last year had a bit of a down year as they ended up missing the playoffs, numerous reasons, injuries, health of the starting rotation. And as we get set for 2017, a number of changes for this Kansas City Royals team as they get ready for this season. We'll see if they have enough to push the Indians, who, on paper right now, probably have the best team in the American League on paper. We'll see how that rivalry builds up throughout the course of this year. Very happy to welcome in Max Rieper of Royals Review. He writes about the Royals, covers the Royals throughout the course of the season and even in the off season as well. And he joins us right now from Kansas City. Max, how you doing?
I'm pretty good, Michael. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Glad to have you back on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm just ready for baseball. We're starting to get a little bit better baseball playing weather, so I'm ready for the season to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Over here on the East Coast, we've been getting some weird weather for weeks now. We've had temperatures in the 60s. We've had temperatures in the 20s. And I think now we're kind of settling into spring, early spring-like weather ourselves. So everyone's getting pumped up for the baseball season right now. Let's just jump right into it with Kansas City. Piggyback off of what I just kind of said in the open. You know, this Royals team coming into this year, down year last year. What are your thoughts going into this year? Before we go breaking down, different position battles and what we need to look forward to with specific players. Coming into this year, what would be the mindset of the Royals fan just now, a year and a half separated from winning the World Series?
Well, I think the Royals right now are at a crossroads because, like you said, they're a year removed from being in the World Champions, and yet they're also a year away from potentially losing a lot of that core to free agency. So we have Eric Hosmer, Mike Moustakas, Lorenzo Cain, and Alcides Escobar, all major parts of that championship team. All of them will be eligible for free agency at the end of the year. Now, they've had some contract talks with Eric Hosmer, but it seems like those talks have been cut off. So, I think a lot of fans are kind of preparing for life possibly without those players. And we thought that when the offseason began that the team really had two directions to go. They could either try to bulk up and take one last hurrah and maybe sign some big free agents and try to reach the World Series again, or maybe they would start the rebuild and start selling guys off, have a big fire sale, and get some prospects for the future. Well, they didn't really do either of those things. They kind of tried to thread the needle in between those two paths, and they traded a few guys away, guys like Wade Davis, their dominant closer, and outfielder Gerard Dyson, and they wanted to get some younger Major League ready players in exchange for them. So they're going to try to extend that window a little bit, and I think Royals fans are hopeful that they can at least make one more run this year with the guys we've been accustomed to. But if things things don't work out this year, I think we know that at least we'll have the cupboard won't be completely bare. That we'll have some players here for the future, and that perhaps we can have a more competitive team in 2018 and 2019 than what we previously thought.
Yeah. I look at this team and I look at what they have in store for 2017. The one thing that stands out for me is pitching. And you take specifically the losses they've endured on the pitching staff. Obviously, I started off with Yonder Ventura. May he rest in peace. Obviously, after that horrific accident that he had back in the off season, and then you have the transaction with Volquez. He leaves for Miami. He now signs with the Marlins, and maybe the biggest loss of any to this staff is in the bullpen with Wade Davis going over to the Chicago Cubs in a trade. Really a lot of tough losses for this pitching staff. And I think the big question for me is, do the Royals have enough in the starting rotation and even in the bullpen to make that push to compete with a team like the Cleveland Indians? I think offensively, they can still do it. I think they can score a lot of runs. They can hit a lot of home runs. They can be competitive from that standpoint, but it comes down to pitching all the time. That's how the Royals got to 2 World Series back-to-back years, was with their pitching. I don't know if they have enough right now going into this season. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the bullpen, was where I'd have the most concerns, just because I do lose Wade Davis to the Cubs. And, I think there's some potential there, but there's a lot of question marks. So Kelvin Herrera, who was their kind of setup guy last year, he'll take over as in the closing role. And I think he'll do a very good job. And he's one of the better middle relievers in the league. He's been an all-star, brings high heat in the high 90s. So I think he'll do a fine job closing. But the problem is when you move him to the closer's role, well, who takes over for him in the middle innings? Last year, Joaquin Soria was a complete disaster for the Royals, even though they gave him a $20 million contract. So they're kind of looking for answers in the middle innings, and I think they've got a couple younger power arms, guys like Matt Strahm, who came on at the end of last year as a rookie, left-hander. They've got a young guy named Kyle Zimmer, who's been a top prospect for several years, who has been hurt a lot, but he could be a factor in the bullpen as well. So they're going to have the work cut out for them as far as assembling a bullpen. And Dayton Moore has been very good at assembling bullpens in the past. It's just that he's really got his work cut out for him because they've had such a dominant bullpen in the past. And you look at the formula for winning when they were in the World Series, they didn't really have a great starting rotation back then.
Right.
And you look at what they have right now compared to Cleveland, and there's no competition. I mean, Cleveland has one of the best rotations in baseball, and the Royals, I think at best, you could say they're maybe slightly below average. But I think it's one of the better rotations they've had in a while. I think, obviously the loss of Yordan Ventura on a human level is a huge loss just for the guys in the guys in that clubhouse. But on a baseball level, that's also a huge loss because he had so much potential. He had I think he was such a young player, and he had that 100-mile-per-hour fastball. You felt like he could become an all-star pitcher in any season. Now we never get to find out what he was capable of doing. So that was a huge loss. But I feel like they were able to make up for that with a little more depth this year. They were able to get Jason Hamill off the free agent market. He had a nice year with the Cubs last year. A little bit of an elbow issue, but hopefully they can avoid disabled-list time with him. And then they got Travis Wood from the Cubs, who was a reliever last year, but they feel like he can be a starter as he's been in the past, and he'll compete for the rotation spot with Nathan Carnes, the pitcher they got from the Mariners for Gerard Dyson. So I feel like in the past the Royals have had fifth starters who didn't give them a chance to compete in baseball games. But this year I think they've got 6 or 7 guys they can put in that rotation and feel pretty good about. So there's a little more depth to withstand any injuries or ineffectiveness as they go into the season, which they haven't really had in the past. But they're going to need that pitching to step up. I think you're right. The bullpen certainly isn't as good as it's been in years past. So that'll be a big key for the Royals this year.
Absolutely, and you brought up 2 big names there in Travis Wood and Jason Hamill, 2 guys who bring that World Series experience to a team that already had that, obviously with the Cubs, and now they're part of the mix here. So that certainly does help this ball club moving forward. I could probably see Travis Wood maybe sliding into, and look, we'll see how bullpens shake out. You never know with the bullpen from one year to the next, but I would imagine that he would probably be that 7th, 8th inning guy, probably the main guy that they will go to in a situation before Ned Yost would go to in a tight situation before he ever brings out Kelvin Herrera. So I think he's going to be a big, big part of this rotation. But for me, this rotation, when I look at it, it's easy to sit there and kind of get down and say, well, you lose Volquez and you lose a talent like Ventura. It's easy to sit there and look, well, what does this team have going into this year? And I look at what Danny Duffy did last year, and here was a guy who won 12 games. He had the best ERA of any starter on the team at 3.51. Had 188 strikeouts. Really had a good year last year. Ian Kennedy, I know, went 11-11, 500, but still, here was a guy that struck out 184 batters, 195 innings. So you start there, and you have 2 guys that aren't necessarily going to light up the radar gun. I mean, it's not exactly, as you said, the Cleveland Indians rotation, their top 2 guys, but those 2 guys can get the job done. They can win their 15 games apiece and help this Royals team stay competitive throughout the year.
Yeah, and I think Danny Duffy is kind of the key to their pitching because, like I said, they've got 5 or 6 guys that could be kind of – that profile is like a mid-rotation number 3 type starter. Not great, but will go out and give you 5, 6 quality innings. Duffy is the guy that really needs to step up and kind of be that all-star level pitcher. And he showed flashes of that last year. He had a game against the Tampa Bay Rays last year where he set the franchise record for strikeouts in the game. Took a perfect game into the 8th inning. And last year really the game was really simplified for him. He kind of shortened his mechanics and put it all together and had a really solid season. It wasn't even a complete season. People forget he didn't start the season in the rotation. He actually had to work his way back into the rotation from the bullpen. So this year he's going to be counted on as the opening day starter, the ace of that rotation. And I think the Royals really need him to take that step up and establish himself, not necessarily as one of the top pitchers in the league, but kind of in that top tier of guys that can go out there and give you 7, 8 innings, complete games at times, and just shut down the opponent, because they haven't really had that. I mean, remember when they went to the World Series, they had to go out and get Johnny Cueto from the Reds and to kind of serve that role, and they didn't have an ace when they were making their run until then. So Danny Duffy kind of needs to be that guy, because if they get to July where they're kind of competing and they need to make a trade like that again for Johnny Cueto, a type pitcher, they don't have the arms in the minor leagues right now to go out and make that kind of trade. So I think Danny Duffy needs to be that guy, and the season kind of hinges upon whether or not he can put it together for a full season.
You brought up the minor league system, and they have 3 pitchers right now in the top that are considered top 5 of their top 30 prospects, and that's Stram, the left-hander, Almonte, who's had some experience up in the major leagues, the right-hander, I believe he's a relief pitcher, and then Zimmer. Any one of these 3 guys you think could have an impact on this team this year? Maybe not right away at the start of the year, obviously. But let's just say getting into June, July, middle of the year, where you're looking for an arm to come up and help the team out if there's an injury or someone just needs to have a start skipped. Any one of these guys who could see maybe being a part of this?
Well, I think Strom he will make the team. I'm pretty sure, and I think he'll be in the bullpen. I think they would still see him as a starter long term, but I think this year they see him being more effective as a reliever, and you may see him as like a 6th or 7th inning guy, maybe even the 8th inning guy if he really does well early in the year. And he came on at the end of last year, threw about 20 innings for the Royals, and was very impressive. So I think they feel pretty confident he's at major league ready at this point. Kyle Zimmer is pretty interesting just because he's a former first-round pick, and he's got lights-out stuff. He may have the best stuff in the entire organization. His problem, though, is that he has just never been healthy. He's only thrown a handful of innings over the last 3 seasons, and he finally had thoracic outlet syndrome surgery, which Mets fans might be familiar with Matt Harvey. And so he's had to work his way back from that. But, there's fingers crossed that maybe he's finally healthy this year. And if he is, he could be an interesting weapon out of that bullpen. Maybe not to start the year, as you say, but maybe mid-season he can come up and give them some quality innings, because he's got lights-out stuff, and he can come on and throw 95-mile-per-hour fastballs, a devastating curveball, and really be effective out of that bullpen. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that happen if he can stay healthy, which is the big if when it comes to Kyle Zimmer. And another interesting name is Josh Staumont, who I like. He was in Double-A last year, probably not ready for the big leagues now, but could come in the middle of the year. And he throws 100 miles an hour with some pretty good secondary stuff. The problem is he has not been able to throw strikes at all at the big league level or at the professional level. Now, that's been as a starting pitcher, and maybe a move to the bullpen will help him kind of harness his command a little bit. And he's pitched a little bit better in the Arizona Fall League and in spring training, but he's a guy that's kind of intriguing because you get a guy that can throw 100-mile-per-hour fastballs out of the bullpen. That's going to blow even big league hitters away. So, that's an interesting name to keep an eye out for the future. Aside from that, like you said, there's not a whole lot of arms to get excited about. Miguel Almonte has pretty good stuff, but he took a huge step back last year and actually was demoted down a level just because his results weren't there. So he's a guy that if he could put it together, he's got the stuff to be an effective reliever, but he's going to have to kind of take a big step forward from last year's disappointing performance. But there's a couple of guys there that could help out in the bullpen later in the year.
Absolutely, and again, just continuing here in the bullpen, last name that I want to touch on, and I know you just touched on it just a little while ago, is Joakim Soria. I don't know what's going on with this guy, but it just seems like he has just fallen off a cliff, and maybe it is age at this point, and he's 32 years old. It's not that old, but he has been pitching for a very long time now. But last season, just a complete drop off from where he was even 2 years ago, and let alone even 3 years ago. ERA was over 4. It seemed whenever they put him out on the mound, he would get runs. Get 30 runs in 60 innings. Lost 8 games, which is the most in his career, and certainly the most that any Royals reliever took last year. So he is light years just by what he did even 6 years ago when he was on this team as their main closer. and where he was even 2 years ago with Pittsburgh, light years behind where he was. This is a big year for him. I mean, if he can even reclaim part of what he used to be from even 2 years ago, that would be such a valuable arm here for Ned Yost in this bullpen, to have your former closer be effective, even in the middle relief role. But he's really got to figure it out this year.
Yeah, it was very curious, his performance last year. I think we counted 13 games last year in which he came into the game with the Royals having the lead or tied, in which he gave up the lead to the opponent. So you think about that. I mean, if it's not Soria, if it's someone else like Wade Davis in those situations, that's potentially 10, 11, 12 more wins the Royals have. So yeah, it was a pretty disappointing performance from Soria. What was really odd is that the Royals, they've typically put together pretty good bullpens, but they haven't had to spend a lot of money on it. They've typically found guys like Wade Davis, who was a starting pitcher, a failed starting pitcher for the Royals. They turned him into an elite reliever. They found Ryan Madsen, who hadn't pitched anywhere for 3 years, and they got a pretty good season out of him. That's usually their MO. So it was kind of curious. They went out and signed Joakim Soria to this 3-year, $21 million deal last winter. A little bit head-scratching, especially considering they had already had a pretty good bullpen, and then he goes out and just lays an egg for the year. So, yeah, I agree. It's a very critical year, not just for him, but for the Royals, because they need to kind of, get some of their money's worth out of him, because small market teams can't really afford to carry a $21 million player that's not contributing positively at all. So, it was pretty mystifying. His velocity is still pretty good. It just looked like his command was way off. He was just leaving the ball up in the zone. It was very hittable. And he'd say after a lot of press, after a lot of games, that he was making good pitches, which kind of annoyed Royals fans a little bit, because we were thinking, if you're making such good pitches, why are they hitting it so far? But I agree. He's old, but he's not old enough that you think he'd be declining already. But we know relievers have kind of a short shelf life sometimes. He has had a couple Tommy John surgeries. As far as we know, there's no health issues, but you never know with these players that sometimes they hide, a nagging soreness or pain. So I don't know. I hope this year. I hope he's healthy, and I hope he's ready to kind of contribute more and be an effective reliever, because I think the Royals really need him, because their formula for success is having that shutdown dominant bullpen, and to do that they need a Joakim Soria that's at least effective, if not dominant. So the Royals they'll be really counting on him this year.
Absolutely. And one other name that could pop up here during the course of the year, maybe one of the non-roster guys. And look, the guy has to make the team. There's always the uphill climb of even making a 25-man roster out of the bullpen, but a veteran guy like an Al Albuquerque, 30 years old. The guy's been in the league for quite a while. His spring training numbers aren't too bad for the 5 games that he has pitched in so far this spring. I mean, this was a guy that gave the Detroit Tigers around 65 to 70 games a year for a couple of years in a row, and pitched pretty well in the middle of that bullpen. I could see him maybe being a under-the-radar candidate, possibly to sneak in if they needed an extra arm, if they really felt that maybe he is pitching well enough in spring training that they could bring him up at least to start the year, or be an option between AAA and the major leagues to be a guy they can bring in.
Yeah, he's definitely the guy out of all the non-roster guys, the one that I've had my eye on as someone that can make the team. You're right. He's got a pretty good track record with Detroit. He has a little bit of an issue with throwing strikes, but he's also got an outstanding slider that strikes out something like 11 hitters per 9 innings during his peak when he was with Detroit. So he's a guy that can at least miss bats. And when you're a reliever, you want someone that can miss bats like that and get those strikeouts when you need them. So I think he's the kind of guy that would have a good chance of making this team. Some of the other guys I have in camp, Seth Maness is kind of an interesting name from the Cardinals last year. He had an elbow injury last year that usually would have required Tommy John surgery, but he had some sort of experimental procedure that allows him to at least be ready for the start of the season. So he's put up pretty good numbers for the Cardinals the last couple of years, more of a ground ball pitcher, doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, but has been pretty effective. So he's another guy that could make the team if he's ready to go opening day. Brandon League, he's trying to make the team as a former closer. Yeah, the former closer for the Dodgers. I believe he didn't pitch anywhere last year, but he's going to try to make it a go. I'm not too optimistic about his chances of making the team, and I think he already had one outing where he was rocked pretty hard. And then the name that is probably drawn a lot of ire from Royals fans is Jonathan Sanchez, who actually pitched here in 2012 as a starting pitcher. Actually only made it about 12 starts before they got rid of him. He was just completely awful. And what made it worse is that we had traded Melky Cabrera for him, and Melky was having an all-star season with the Giants. So he's trying to make it a comeback with the Royals. Didn't pitch anywhere last year either, but he's only like 34, 35 years old, trying to make it as a reliever. Not too optimistic about his chances of making the team either, but definitely Albuquerque. I think if there was a name that I had to put money on, it would be him. Bobby Parnell is another name, former Mets closer. He could make the team, but I think Albuquerque probably would have the best chance right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think Albuquerque probably has the best chance, and you bring up Jonathan Sanchez, and some of the Royal fans kind of rolling their eyes at that. It could be worse. It could be worse. It could be like the Mets with Tim Tebow, but I mean, he apparently he's going to make his start at DH tomorrow, I believe, for the Mets, but that's another story. Let's jump to this offense, folks. Right here on the Open Mic program, we're talking about the Kansas City Royals. Myself, Michael Cohen, my guest on the phone lines, Max Rieper, who writes for Royals Review, out in Kansas City. Let's talk about this offense, and I think the big story has to do more with off-field stuff, and that's contracts with Eric Hosmer. Scott Boras represents a number of major Royal players, from Lorenzo Cain, Hosmer, Aslides Escobar, I believe, as well, and Salvador Perez. All these guys are pending free agents at some point down the road, and the Royals haven't shown an inkling to get a deal done. And I think I read somewhere on your site, actually, about Hosmer saying that he wanted to get a deal done by opening day, and it's looking less and less likely that's going to happen. So it creates a very interesting scenario between what the Royals can get done with really maybe their most clutch player of anybody on this ball club right now.
Yeah, the Hosmer discussions have been interesting. First of all, because he went public with the fact he was having long-term deals with the Royals, which typically they're a team that doesn't like to be public about that kind of thing. Like they got a Danny Duffy extension done a few weeks ago, and that kind of came out of nowhere. Whereas Hosmer kind of made the tours and said, "Hey, I want to stay in Kansas City, but I want to get a deal done by opening day." And part of me kind of thinks that was part of Scott Boras' PR machine saying, "Hey, we're willing to stay if the Royals meet our asking price." And now Boras, his asking price, he floated a number of 10 years, $200 million, which for a player like Eric Hosmer, yeah, he's been clutch. Yeah, he's won some Gold Gloves. Yeah, he's put up some okay numbers. But you look at his numbers, and they're a far cry from the guys that get $200 million contracts. Guys like Joey Votto, guys like Alex Rodriguez in his prime, guys like Prince Fielder. And they're comparing him to like Mark Teixeira, who, look at his numbers. He had 30 home runs a year, Gold Glove first baseman, All-Star. Hosmer made his first All-Star team last year. He hits more like 18 home runs a year. He's not even a 300 hitter. So I'm kind of baffled at the high numbers that the Boras camp is floating out there. And I'll be really interested in seeing what Hosmer ends up getting on the open market because, I know if you look at more traditional statistics like RBI and home runs, he's a pretty good player. But I think if you look at some of the more modern analytics, they don't like his defense as much. They say, yeah, he's not as a below average hitter for a first baseman. So there's going to be a lot of teams that I think will be turned off by the more advanced analytics, but it only takes one or two teams to say, we like what we see out of him. We think we can fix him. We think Kauffman Stadium depresses his power. We think he's a Gold Glove first baseman, and we're willing to pay $150 million for him. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't know if the Royals are going to meet his asking price. They were talking for a while, but there's a report a couple days ago from John Heyman, the reporter for FanRag, who said they had kind of stopped talking. Yeah, I know with opening day kind of around the corner, you think there's not a whole lot of time for them to get a deal done. But he did say if he reaches free agency that would not take the Royals out of the running. But of course, you start opening it up to bidders, and who knows how high the price can get. So, the Royals, he's a fan favorite. I think he's a favorite with the management as well. I think they would bend over backwards to try to keep him. If there's a guy they would spend a record amount of money on, it would be him. But how high does his number go? I think they're willing to go $100 million, but will they go much more beyond that? I doubt it. And would he get that from another team? It's hard for me to see that. But it's going to be fascinating to watch.
It will be. I mean, there are a lot of teams out there that are going to be looking for first baseman or potentially looking for first baseman come 2018 and even 2019 for that matter. I think the one thing that's going to be very attractive, and Boras is going to use this, is his postseason experience. And he's put up very good postseason numbers. I know a couple of years ago in the playoffs, he didn't exactly hit well average-wise, hit only .212, but he still had that big hit against the Mets. He still had big hits against the Rangers, even the wild card game against the A's a couple of years ago, always seem to come up with big hits in big spots for Kansas City in the postseason, and that's really where a lot of that money is going to be made, is based on his ability to win games when it matters. Not only that, but also his ability to play almost every single day. He's played 158 games each of the last 2 years, and has been a good player. I mean, is he a $200 million plus player? Probably not. I agree with you there, but he's been a very, very solid player throughout his career, especially of late.
Yeah, and I think he's a great clubhouse guy. He's a leader in that clubhouse, and he's got kind of a superstar persona, handsome guy, really popular with the fans. And so he's got kind of a superstar persona, but you just look at his stats, and they're not really superstar stats. So how much are teams willing to pay for that extra, for that clutch hitting, for that leadership? I don't know. Maybe some teams is willing to shell out. The other thing for going for him is he's going to be really young for a free agent. I think he's only going to be 27 years old, which is very young for a free agent. And there's not a whole lot of other first basemen out there that are going to be eligible for free agency this winter. I think Carlos Santana and Lucas Duda would be the only competition for him. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what teams pony up for him.
Absolutely. Speaking, and let me go across on the hot corner of the third base. Royals get Mike Moustakas back, and this is big for a number of reasons. One, because he is one of their main power sources. He is one of their big bats in the middle of this lineup, and also with the loss of Kendrys Morales, who goes up to Toronto, to have a guy like Moustakas back in this lineup and to provide that power that would have been sorely missed without Morales there, it's going to be really huge. So this is a big return coming up here this season, and I think he's just starting to get back in the preseason games now this week.
Yeah, I think that is a huge comeback for the Royals, getting Moustakas back. Last year they had Cheslor Cuthbert, a rookie, fill in for him, and he held his own. I mean, he wasn't terrible out there, but it really made you appreciate, not only Mike Moustakas' bat, but his fantastic defense over the third. So I think getting him back is going to be huge. It seems like he's a player that, frustrated us for many years, but in 2015 had a fantastic year with 22 home runs, hit for average. He adjusted his approach. He was getting frustrated because he was getting those radical defensive shifts where all the infielders would be on the right side of the field against him, and of course he would just hit it into outs. So he said, well, if they're going to put all their fielders on that side, I'm going to start hitting it to left field. And lo and behold, he started getting a lot more hits, and then started even to hit it for power. So it's been an approach that's really worked for him. And going into the 2016 season, I wanted to see if he was for real, if that change was for real, if he was just kind of a one-year wonder. In 2016, he was actually hitting fantastic until he got hurt. So I'm pretty hopeful that he can kind of come back and be the kind of hitter we saw in 2015, give you 25 home runs a year, hit for 270, and provide good defense for the Royals. Because I think they really need that in the middle of the lineup. I think their offense was really hurting without him last year. And so to get that back, and it's a contract year for him. Let's face it, he's kind of playing for his next contract. And, if he has a big year, that could be a pretty nice payday for him too. So, I'm really excited about getting Moustakas back, and I think it's going to be huge for the Royals.
Absolutely. Well, what about Brandon Moss? Brandon Moss comes into the ball club. He's never been a really big, consistent average hitter. Sometimes he'll hit around. He's a 240 lifetime hitter anyway. Hit only 225, I believe, last year. He comes in as basically going to be taking the Morales spot in this lineup. Well, the power's there, Max. The average obviously is not. Now, that's a bit of a drop off from that standpoint. What kind of impact does this guy have that could be both positive and negative for this team going into this season, from your standpoint?
Well, he was an interesting signing because I think he represents a marked departure from their usual MO. So the Royals have kind of been known for being this team that doesn't hit for a lot of power, but they'll hit for high contact rates, put the ball in play, make something happen. And Brandon Moss is not that kind of player at all. He is a patient, draw walks, hit for a low average, and then hit the ball a country mile when he gets a good pitch. So that's a lot different. And I think, Dayton Moore at the end of the year, last year, he said, we did things in 2016 the way we've always done things, and it didn't work. And maybe we need to change our approach a little bit. And I think Moss maybe represents that approach because we saw balls leaving ballparks all over the place last year. The home runs were through the roof, and the Royals were near the bottom of the league in that. So getting Brandon Moss, who hit 28 home runs for St. Louis last year, I think is a step in that kind of direction. Also getting Jorge Soler from the Cubs, who I think has that kind of home run potential. And I think the big concern in the past has been if we bring power hitters to Kauffman Stadium, which is a pitcher's park, a big spacious park, their home runs are going to drop off. Well, the thing with Moss is, if you look at how far his home runs go, and he hits some of the farthest home runs in the league. I mean, the home runs he hits don't scrape the wall. They go into the 10th or 11th row. So I think he's a guy they feel like his power can translate to Kansas City and provide some of the power they've been needing. Now, you're right. He doesn't hit for much of an average, and he's going to strike out a lot. So that gets away from some of their approach. So we'll have to see how that works out with their lineup. He's also really not a very good hitter against left-handers, so you may see him sit against a lot of left-handers, and maybe that'll give Jorge Soler a chance to DH more since he's not so great in the field. But I like the pickup. I think they got a pretty good DH at a really cheap price. It wasn't a very good market, as you know, for DHs this offseason. They were not going for as much as they expected. Mark Trumbo and Edwin Encarnacion both went for far less than I think they expected. So I think the Royals did a pretty good job getting a solid DH that can give them power at a good price.
Mm-hmm. And it will be very interesting to watch. I'm really curious to see how Brandon Moss fits into this team. I mean, the good thing for him is that he has a lot of good players around him. So while they do lose something in the batting average, he does provide the power. And then you have the other guys around him, like obviously Moustakas and Hosmer, Kane, Salvador Perez. You have a lot of good players around you. It just makes things a lot easier. So when you have a player go into a big slump, which Brandon Moss has had a tendency to do at times, fans won't notice it as much as if he was really the only main power source on the lineup.
Yeah, and I think they have the ability to mix and match according to matchups a little bit more. So, like I said, Soler could DH for a little bit, and then you could put Paulo Orlando into the lineup in right field, who hit pretty well last year, was hitting 300 most of the year, but kind of slumped at the end. But he showed some things as a high contact guy who can run a little bit. They've got a kid named Hunter Dozier, who was their top minor league player last year. You could see him come up at some point and play all over the field. And then Peter O'Brien, who Yankees fans might know, he used to be in their system. He was acquired this offseason from the Diamondbacks, and he's really made an impression in camp with some of his light tower power. He'll probably start the year in the minors, but he's got tremendous power. Doesn't really have a position, but he could come up maybe in platoon with Moss if need be, play a little DH, maybe play a little outfield, and he could provide that kind of power that they need as well. So they'll have some interesting options, I think, more power options they've had in the past, that's for sure.
Very interesting. That's a very interesting name to pay attention to right there with Peter O'Brien at some point down the road. Let me ask you about this, because if this kind of plays into the Hosmer thing as well. Considering that this team has Hosmer potentially as a free agent here down the road, you got Moustakas as a free agent coming up after this season. Salvador Perez, obviously someone whose contract is probably going to be a discussion point at some point down the road as well. Do you think, and I hate when teams do this anyway, do you think there's that discussion going around it with the Royals management saying, well, what if we thought about Perez moving him out from behind the plate and putting him at first base? I hate the discussion because it's such a hard transition from catcher to first base or any position to first base. But it has to be something of at least a thought down the road for this team.
Yeah, and they have Perez locked up long term, so I think that is maybe something they would consider down the road. He's still pretty young, something like 26 years old, I believe. But yeah, I think eventually, you don't see big body catchers like him stick behind the plate for their entire careers, and he does take a beating back there. I mean, he plays 130, 140 games per year behind the plate, takes a lot of foul tips, has had a couple concussions, and you figure that's going to take a beating on him and wear him down eventually. The problem is moving him to first base. I mean, first of all, he's got to make that transition, but also you look at his bat, and it's pretty good for a catcher. I mean, he hits 20 home runs a year, but his on-base percentage is well below 300, doesn't draw walks, he's not a 300 hitter, certainly. So if you move him to first base, you're going to be having one of the first baseman who's really providing less than a below-average production offensively at first base. So I think that would be the big concern. I think he's going to stick behind the plate for quite a while. First of all, just because he provides such a great defense behind the plate. But I think eventually that's going to have a conversation they're going to have. I mean, you look at Joe Mauer; he's had to move to first base eventually. And a lot of other guys end up moving to first base. So the knees just don't take that beating for so many years. So it could be a conversation they'll have to have eventually. I expect him to be behind the plate for at least a couple more years.
Okay. Do you think? I do think though they'll probably give him more breaks here this season, just to rest his legs a little bit. I mean, they do that with all catchers, but catching 140 games for a catcher is a lot. So I'd imagine they probably try to cut down some of his games behind the plate.
Well, I hope so. Ned Yost says that every year, but every year he ends up trotting Salvador out there every single day. And, look, he had 2 deep postseason runs, too. I mean, we forget that he had pretty much an extra month added to his season in 2014 and 2015. And I believe that over those 2 years, if you can count the postseason, that was the most innings anyone had ever caught. So, yeah, they're wearing him down to the nub. And you'd think Ned Yost, who used to be a backup catcher back in his day, you'd think he'd have a little more favoritism towards the backup catcher Drew Butera, but he likes putting Salvi out there, and he's the leader of this team, and it's nice. It's like a nice comforting feeling to have Salvi back there, and you like his bat in the lineup. But yeah, I feel like they need to get him some more rest out there. And we've seen Salvador have second half slides in the last couple of years. I mean, I think he's just getting worn down, and so you think if he rests a little bit more, then maybe he's a little more productive in the second half because his numbers just take a dive. Once we get in the hot summer months of July and August. So I'd like to see him get more rest, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they do have the DH there, and I know Brandon Moss is going to be the main DH for the most part. It wouldn't be a bad thing just to move some bodies around over the course of a long season, give him a chance to DH, or even just have a straight day off a little more often than he has had in the past. That's going to be a big key here for this season. A couple other guys that I want to talk about. One guy that's fairly new. I know he did play a little bit last year, and that is Whit Merrifield, the second baseman. He played half the season last year. Very young, fairly young. He is 28 years old, but got his first taste of Major League Baseball last year. What can he provide to this team as the starting second baseman here? Now, he does have a lot of good veteran guys around him on the infield. That certainly helps. But what would you say the expectation is, or even the ceiling is for this guy?
Yeah, he kind of came on as a sensation last year when he was called up. Hit about 300 over his first 40 games, but then went into a slide and ended up being demoted for a little bit. Right now, they're saying second base is kind of an open competition. I would say he's probably the favorite right now to get the starting job, although Ned Yost has said whoever wins the starting job is probably not going to be the everyday starter. They'll probably mix it up a little bit. So he's in there in a mix with Christian Colon, who's he had the game-winning hit in the World Series against the Mets has been a utility infielder for them. Cheslor Cuthbert, who played third base last year, they're going to try to move him to second base and see if that works. Certainly he would provide the most offensive upside, I think, of the players that are in the competition. And then there's Raul Mondesi, son of former big leaguer Raul Mondesi, who is probably the best young prospect, but came on. He was called up at the end of last year and was just completely overwhelmed by big league pitching. So hit like 185, but he's got tremendous power and he's got excellent speed and he's a really good defender. So they like his upside. I just don't know if he's ready for the big leagues at this point. So right now I would say Whit Merrifield is the favorite. He brings a lot of speed and defense to the position. He's a high contact guy, like I was talking about their formula in the past, where he just kind of slaps at the ball, puts the ball in play. And the good thing with him also is he can play all over the field. So he can fill in for you at second base, shortstop, third base, and the outfield. And they like that versatility. So I would expect him to get the most playing time right now. But I think Colon, who's out of options, they can't send him to the minors right now. He will be in the mix as well. And then Cuthbert's also out of options, so he could get a couple starts over there. I don't expect him getting a whole lot of playing time at second base, but you may see him in the mix just so they can get something out of him because he can't play third base because Mike Moustakas is there. He may DH a little bit, but right now I'd probably look more for a trade for him, since he seems to be blocked in Kansas City. But, Merrifield, he's probably the favorite, but I think Mondesi would probably be a player they would call up by midseason. If he shows he can hit, AAA pitching, I bet he would be called up before too long and would be the everyday second baseman by midseason.
I mean, how far away do you think Mondesi is? Because, again, he did have the taste last year. He did have the one at-bat in the playoffs a couple years ago in the World Series. Was he just too overwhelmed, as you said, for the moment last year? Do you think he's kind of settling in from what you've seen from him in spring training here?
Well, first of all, he's very young. I mean, they've been very aggressive in promoting him. they haven't exactly waited for him to put up good numbers in the minors before they moved him on to the next level. So I think they feel like his defense is major league ready, and he brings a lot of speed to the lineup. His hitting has yet to come around. So I don't know. I think a lot of it's plate recognition. He doesn't walk a whole lot, and he strikes out a ton. So I think he's going to have to work on that in AAA a little bit. But he provides a lot of upside, and he's got tremendous power. I've heard him compared a little bit to Elvis Andrus for the Rangers a little bit, because his position's really shortstop. I think second base would just be to make room for Alcides Escobar, who's already playing there in Kansas City. So eventually I would expect him to move over to shortstop when Escobar departs next year. But, I don't know. I think he's going to have to work on recognizing pitches, not swinging at bad pitches, and just working on his craft a little bit at AAA, because he's got the tools. I mean, you see him hit a ball, blast a ball over the wall, and you're like, wow, that's great power for a middle infielder. It's just that he needs to make contact on a more consistent basis.
Okay, and the last guys we know, Alex Gordon's here. I mean, he's big, a very important veteran presence on his team in left field. Lorenzo Cain is another guy that is a very interesting situation, because he's another guy that has a contract. I did read that he talked to the Royals about a 6-year deal, but that never really led to much. So here's a guy who has been a very good player for this team. He steals bases, he hits some home runs, hits for a pretty good average. 287 here last year. What is his situation? Well, his situation is another one that's going to be very, very interesting here developing for this Royals team going forward.
Yeah, I mentioned that Danny Duffy's kind of the key to the pitching staff. I think Lorenzo Cain is the key to the lineup, because he's just a year removed from being finishing third in American League MVP balloting. He had a fantastic 2015 season, hit 300, 18 home runs, fantastic defense in the outfield, 101 runs scored that year. So he's a guy that really is one of the better offensive players, and of course provides great defense in the outfield. But last year his problem was he couldn't stay healthy. So he was pretty much gone after August last year. So he's back and a little bit healthier. He's got a track record of kind of having a lot of disabled stints. So we're kind of crossing our fingers with him. But, like you said, he's in a contract year. He's expressed his desire to stay here. Now, the Royals don't seem to be as willing to lock him up as they are with Moustakas and Hosmer, I think because of his age. He'll be 32 next April, whereas Moustakas and Hosmer are still under 30. And you figure Cain will probably get a pretty good deal out in the market. I think a lot of people have compared him to Dexter Fowler as far as contracts go. And Fowler, I think, signed a 5-year, $80-some million deal with the Cardinals this year. So, that's probably what Cain can expect. Maybe a little less because of his age and his injury history. And that doesn't seem like something the Royals are willing to pay. So I think this could be the last year for Cain in Kansas City. And I think they really need his bat. They need him to hit 300 again. I think they need him to hit 15 to 20 home runs, so 20 to 25 bases, and provide that outstanding defense that he always provides, because he's been such a great guy in that lineup. So I'll be looking for a big year for him. He's certainly going to be key.
He certainly will. I mean, the Royals coming into this year, and going back to what we talked about at the start of the program, they have the potential to go out there and certainly compete for the wild card. I certainly believe they can, if they can pitch well, if their bullpen can really straighten itself out and solidify a number of key spots from even behind the close or behind Herrera, going 7th, 8th inning. If they can solidify all those things, we know their offense can produce. I think they can be a team that can win, between 85 to 88 games and get themselves into a situation where they can compete for a wild card with the likes of Toronto and the Yankees and whoever else, Seattle, Texas, whoever else may be involved in the wild card race when we get to that point.
Yeah, I think there's a wide range of outcomes for the Royals. I think I can see a scenario where they, have a fantastic year and make the playoffs. I can see a scenario where everything goes wrong and they lose 90 to 95 games. I mean, this is a team with a high variability rate. I think because they have so many guys that had, injuries last year, and you're kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that doesn't happen again. I think you've got to, you also got to figure if they fall out of it in July, that they could have a fire sale and just decide we're going to trade Hosmer, see what we can get, trade Lorenzo Cain, see what we can get. That would cause a losing streak in August and September. On the other hand, I can also see if they get Lorenzo Cain back the way he was in 2015, they get Mike Moustakas back the way he was hitting in 2015. If Eric Hosmer hits 25 home runs again, if Jason Hamill's a solid pitcher again, if Danny Duffy becomes an all-star pitcher, then I can see them competing. And the American League has a couple teams, that look really, really good, Cleveland and Boston among them. But I don't see, I don't see a ton of other teams that look great right now. I think there's a lot of teams kind of jockeying below in that next tier, and I think the Royals could be among those teams. I mean, they've got, certainly they know how to go out there and win. They've got that confidence and that swagger. I think they feel like, and I think they have a little chip on their shoulder because I think everyone's already writing them off. So I think they're a team that could go out there and surprise some people. They're just going to need a lot of things to go right. And, of course, in 2015, a lot of things went right for them. They were kind of lucky that some things played out the way they did, and they took advantage of it, and they won the World Series. So I can see a scenario where they are competitive this year. I just don't know how many things have to go right for them to compete and be in it in July. And it'll be interesting come July to see what happens if Dayton Moore decides they can add another piece, or if they're going to start selling off pieces, or maybe they'll just stay put the way they did last year. So it'll be an interesting summer in Kansas City.
It really will be. And just looking at the schedule, they're going to see a lot of Twins in the first month of the year. They'll have a series against Chicago. They'll see Oakland and Anaheim, who counts might be considered bottom feed. I know that Anaheim still has a lot of talent, of course, on their team with Mike Trout and Pujols, but for the most part, a lot of people don't have high expectations for the Angels and the A's going into the year. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it should be an easy start for Kansas City, but to start where they should get off to a decent start this season. And it'll be almost a month and a week before they see the Cleveland Indians at home at Kauffman Stadium from May 5th to the 7th. So that will give the Royals some time to really build on what kind of team they want to be within the first month of the year, and to kind of hang around with Cleveland. We'll see how things transpire over the course of the first month, as we know. But that's going to be the big series to circle on the calendars in the first half of the year.
And I think for them, too, the big key is consistency. Last year, they were just such a hot and cold team. They got off to a good start, but then in the month of July, they went something like 6-23, which seemed like that would doom their season. But then in August, they roared back, went on a winning streak, and kind of crept back into the wild card race. But they ended up falling short, and it was too little too late. So this year, I think they really need to be more even keel, and certainly injuries were a big part of why they were so hot and cold last year. But they really need to be, and I think with their starting rotation, now they have a better chance to be more even keel and win on a more consistent basis, because I think they have 5 guys who can go out there and give them solid, 5-6 innings every night out. So, but I think that's what I'm going to be looking for them, getting off to a good start, but then maintaining that throughout the year instead of having the ups and downs we had last year.
Absolutely. Max, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about some Royals baseball here with me this evening. Certainly when we get going during the season, throughout the course of the season, we'll bring you back on. We'll talk about where the Royals are and talk about the American League Central throughout the year.
Absolutely, Michael. It's a lot of fun talking about baseball.
All right. Take care, man.
All right. Thanks.
Take care. Thank you. All right, folks, that's Max Rieper of Royals Review, as he is a writer on Royals Review, and you can check them out on RoyalsReview.com. You can also follow them on Twitter at Royals Review. Really, they do a lot of great stuff in covering the Royals, really in-depth, and really a great spot when we bring Max on to talk about Kansas City, really a team that has really turned the corner over the last few years now from where they were. I remember not even 5 years ago when the Kansas City Royals, when you thought about Kansas City, you really didn't think about a team that was going to win much at all. And they have certainly changed things over the last few years, from their front office and the way they've been able to develop players. And, of course, getting to a couple of World Series in a row in 2014 and 15. But as we said, this is going to be an interesting year for them. Can they, 1, stay healthy? Can they, 2, get this pitching staff squared away? I have concerns about this starting rotation going into the season. I think if everything goes well, yes, they can be competitive and they can compete for a wild card berth, as can a number of other teams in the American League. But they really need guys like Danny Duffy and Ian Kennedy, who haven't exactly been looked upon as aces in the past. And in the case of Ian Kennedy, hasn't been looked upon as a potential 1 or 2 starter in a very, very long time, going back to even when he was a Yankees prospect. Where will this team be when we get through the first month of the year, let alone the first half of this year? So it's going to be a very interesting challenge here for Kansas City this year. And I think Max brought up a good point. All these contracts that are coming up, all these potential free agents that are coming up for this team. If this team were out of it in July, would they have a fire sale? Possibly. Possibly. They're also trying to rebuild that minor league system too. They got some good prospects down there, but maybe not enough that are going to wow you at this point. But this is a team that can compete if all goes well, if all stay healthy throughout the course of this 2017 season. So that will conclude our preview of the Kansas City Royals here for the 2017 season. And when we come back on Friday, folks, on this open mic program, we will talk about the San Francisco Giants. Now, keep in mind, we will have a special time. We will be on 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Pacific Time. And we'll have our guest out there from the Bay Area, and that's Michael Saltzman, who also goes by the nickname Candlestick Will. He will join us, and we will talk about the Giants throughout the course of the show on Friday night. So keep in mind, be ready for that. Remember to follow us on the Open Mic program on Twitter and on Facebook, and just get the latest information of that episode coming up. One thing I will try to do, and if I can ever get more time on my hands here, I will certainly do it. It's been really tough with work and everything. I would love to take these episodes and just throw them onto YouTube. I'm going to try to do that. I'm looking to do that. Love to do a live stream. That I think that might lead to an experiment that may end up failing at some point, but we'll give it a chance at one point with the YouTube down the road. But for right now, folks, keep in mind Friday coming up on March 10th, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 7 Pacific. We'll talk about the San Francisco Giants. And then going into next week, we're looking to probably touch on the Boston Red Sox. And this is all leading towards the end of the month. And as we've made this a tradition, at the end of the month, we'll talk about the two New York teams, the Yankees and the Mets. So, folks, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Big thank you to Max Rieper for joining us here this evening as well. Take care. We'll talk to you on Friday night right here on the Open Mic program.